Hey, good morning, everyone who's just starting to join us. I'm going to give everybody about a minute to get their audio set up who is in the waiting room, and then we'll get going. I'm here on Ray McCormick's farm. You can kind of see behind me. It's got a lot of rain yesterday. Would you say 5 inches?
5 inch.
5 inches of rain yesterday, so you can see some water out in the field. But luckily, Ray's ground faring a lot better than the conventional till that we went past on the way here. So, all right, we're just going to give everyone a couple more seconds here and then we'll get started. All right. I'm managing editor Michaela Faulkner. This is the first of our Ask the Operator webinars of the 2024 Fellowship with Ray McCormick, brought to you by the Nature Conservancy, and we thank them for their support this year of the fellowship program. You can ask questions throughout this webinar. We're going to be talking about Ray's planter and some other things on his mind, especially with the rain and the soil erosion that he's been seeing in some areas. So we're going to talk about that. You can ask questions at any time. I will ask them to Ray, or if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you to ask the question yourself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ray.
And good morning. And thanks so much for joining me and being a part of the no-till soil health movement. And I really want to put out my thanks to Larry Clemens and Nature Conservancy. I served on their board for 9 years, and they're a great organization, do a lot to promote no-till cover crops. We are standing on my wife's home farm where she grew up. This was a dairy operation, and I started dating her when she was 15 and I was 16. So I've been to this farm for quite some time. We were going to broadcast live from inside the planter, planting into some big, beautiful cover crops, but it's rained 5 inches. And of course, that's a disaster because we're going to be not only behind now, but we're going to be out of the fields for some time. But I am proud of the fact that I have no-till and cover crops on every field. So what could have been 100 years worth of erosion, these rain events like this, or what is the primary cause of the massive erosion, that didn't happen here. And I've got cover crops anchoring the soil down. But of course, getting 5 inches of rain, freshly planted crops, it's going to be tough. We'll just see how that comes out. It's drizzling rain, but we're going to go ahead and talk about the planter. But I did want to tell you one story about dating my wife here on a dairy farm. So on our second date, I went into the house here and into the kitchen and met her mother. And Cheryl was looking beautiful, and her mother was so happy and so forth. And so when we went to leave to go out on our second date, as I stepped out onto the porch, her father yells, "Get back in there, you son of a bitch!" And I raced back through the door into the kitchen, and her mother goes, "No, no, no, he's yelling at the cows." So that was our second date, but I was able to overcome the trauma, and now we've been happily married for a long time. She's a great partner in the farming operation. So let's look at the planter that got pulled out of the mud 2 nights ago because I planted up until the last second, trying to get as much planted as possible. This is a Porsche planter. These were made in Germany. This one was manufactured in Kansas, but I switched from a John Deere to a Porsche after doing some studying on how I could overcome the problems I was having with the John Deere plant. The first thing you might notice is there's no row cleaner. There's no coulter, row cleaner, or anything. So I wanted a planter. If you believe in minimum soil disturbance, then I didn't like this raking all the residue over and disturbing the residue and so forth. And Paul Jessup, the famous guy from Nebraska that does all the research on no-till, he's the only one I ever saw. He does a presentation on why you should use a row cleaner, because you have a cleared off area, you have a heavy residue area, And so you have non-uniformity in the soil or at the soil surface. He wants perfect uniformity. So when I don't move anything, then you have a hard time finding the row. So if you say, I want to go out and see how it's closing the slot, you have a hard time even finding the slot because of so little disturbance. One of the keys to doing that is you have to have these superior disc openers. And these are far bigger. These are forged steel, and these are bigger and sturdier and have a great bearing system. The John Deere planters, they would have rivets around this and a small bearing. This is the Yetter bearing, and you have a series of holes where you bolt the disc on. So with the John Deere, we would constantly trying to make it plant 2 3/4 inch deep into non-disturbed soil. It would constantly rip the rivets out of the True V openers on the John Deere planter. These are bolted on with a bigger, more thicker, stronger forged steel True V opener. And we got these from Needham Ag Supply in Kentucky. And these are far superior, last longer, but it also can do all this work. So look at that. That's how much soil we're disturbing, that thin slot. So again, I went away from even having a fertilized boot because on the John Deere, the fertilized boot was doing more disturbance than the True V opener. And when you're going through 100% cover crops on every acre, cover crop and stuff would get in behind that boot and start dragging a bigger slot, and you could shear bolts. So I went away, thanks to going to no-till meetings from the great no-tiller Mike Starkey. I saw that he wasn't doing this, and he was using tubular off of the back. When I bought this planter, they said, if you'll buy the planter, we'll add the tubular for free, and these are fabulous. Now you're putting the nitrogen, streaming the nitrogen on both sides of the row, but on top of the ground. So these run through cover crop straw constantly, and nothing ever plugs up, nothing breaks, and you're delivering nutrients on each side of the row. So with these, we're putting on 25 gallon an acre, 23 gallons of which is 32% nitrogen and 22 and 3 gallon of thiazole, putting sulfur and nitrogen on the back of the row. That gives that corn all the nitrogen and nutrients it needs for a long time. And we'll get into that. So I supply, now you have to fill up a lot. We deliver, 4,000 or 5,000 gallons of nitrogen a day to the planter. But essentially, you're putting on a lot of your nitrogen with a 24 row planter. So that helps in how big the job is to side drill. So come on around here and we'll keep talking. So this True V opener is doing all this work, but here's a great addition. The gauge wheels that came on this planter and the gauge wheels that are on John Deere planters and drills, they have a plastic center. Well, when you farm like I do, it would bust the plastic or bust around the bolt-on bearing and mechanism. These mudslingers, or let me get it right, these mudsmiths that we got from Phil Needham, I believe, but I'm not positive. But see, they don't have, there I'm losing my washer off of there. These are not solid. Also, that makes it so mud. See, I've been through the mud the last 20 minutes of trying to get planted. Mud doesn't pack in between the True V opener and your gauge wheel. Dropping gauge wheels off and taking a big screwdriver like this and prying the mud out of them. There's 48 of them on a 24 row planter. There's the solution. Hard metal, they don't bust and they don't plug up with mud. So an important addition, unless you've got perfect conditions all the time and smooth ground, when you're running over chunks of wood or a groundhog or a rock or a fence post, these are strong, they hold up, but most importantly, they don't plug with mud. So let's move on back to the closing wheel. So these are the Yetter poly twisters. So we've had different kinds of closing wheels, and my good friend Matt Crow from Greene County, Indiana, he said he's tried different ones. He liked these the best. Well, they're just poly, and they got these twister knobs on them. So I went from the Dawn curve tine to these, and you wouldn't think by looking at it, but buddy, they do the job. They are great about closing the slot. And you know, the only disadvantage I can think of, you can't switch them side to side. You got to, once they're wore out, you can't switch them back and forth. But that they do such a great job helps pay back in a hurry for the investment. And anytime you're investing in a planter this size, you know, to put these kind of wheels on or to put this on, it can cost you $5,000 to $10,000. But again, as I told Michaela last night, the planter in a no-till cover crop operation, your corn planter, is probably or surely the most important piece of equipment you have, because you only get one shot of getting that perfect stand. And of course, you have to have a great stand to make these super high yields that we're experiencing these days. One of the things that I've changed in my operation, and it's thanks to Matt Crow, again from Greene County, is to be patient. And I've given talks my whole life, no-tilling, and tell people to wait, but it's hard to do. And finally, he convinced me is just don't go plant corn until it warms up. And I did that last year, and it just blew the doors off of my corn yields. So you'll see a lot of research from Purdue and Illinois, or they aren't no-tillers. They really don't know this as well as farmers that no-till. Waiting for warm conditions where you get great uniformity in the stand is the important factor for a high yield, not planting. Let me say that again. High yields come from perfect stands, not from planting dates. So we delayed planting dates, and it looks like we're going to be forced to this year, but don't panic. If you get a great stand with corn in the last week in May and the first week in June, you can grow fabulous yields. So wait, be patient, have a planter that can plant into the conditions that we have when we have cover crops. Now, the cover crops that I have been gorgeous this year. I put them all on, as most of you probably know, with the combine. And the combine is able to evenly distribute the seed very accurately because you're going slow and you have multiple ports where you're distributing the cover crops. So my cover crops this year have just been gorgeous. Michaela, I sent her some information on the biomass removal that we did on one of our fields. This is measured by a lab, independent lab, and an independent person came and did the removal. I didn't do it. And there was 650 pounds of potash per acre in the biomass that we removed. There was 50 to 90 pounds of phosphorus and about 100 pounds of nitrogen, and then on, calcium, zinc, and so forth. My point is that when you're growing cover crops, especially annual ryegrass, I'm sure most of my roots would be 4 foot plus in the ground. I let it get this big is what I was planting into 2 nights ago. It was 3 to 3.5 foot tall. It's down 4 foot into the soil and more. Jamie Scott has documented it down 8 foot. So you're going down and getting nutrients out of the soil that would never be tapped in and never utilized, and bringing it up to the surface in biomass, in plant material that will eventually it's not available instantly, and it may not be available that year, depending on which nutrient we're talking about. But think of that. We're bringing up nutrients to be utilized by our crops. That's how you get ahead in long-term no-till cover crops, besides improving your soils and not having all your soils go off into the Gulf of Mississippi when you have this unfortunate 5-inch rainfall event. this is what we protect the land with. And this is what I tell my landlords and show my landlords, that you appreciate their land. And I'm going to hold it in place and build their soils up using soil health, using highly available carbon dioxide in the air, pulling that carbon dioxide down into the soil and utilizing the excess carbon. The other day, I was listening to Rural Ag Network, and they were interviewing the shark guy, and they were asking different leaders in the ag industry, what's the greatest thing about agriculture? And he said, it's that first pass, smelling that soil as you make that first pass. I'm like, oh my God. He thinks, and he's telling people that that's the greatest thing, is releasing this soil organic carbon into the air. That's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be sequestering the excess carbon into our soils to build them and build them and build them. Carbon is the number one nutrient element, just like in your own body. In the soil, carbon is the number one element, the most abundant. And to be releasing it with tillage is a crime. And you shouldn't be telling a nationwide audience that that's the best thing about agriculture. It's probably the worst thing about agriculture. So people need to get on the ball. Not only is it good for climate change and not is it good for soil erosion, but it's good for your bottom line. And that really counts when you go to the bank and they're saying most farmers this year are showing a decline in their net worth or their projected income. And Ray, you're the only one that's showing an improvement. Well, it doesn't come just from the good yields and reduced input costs, but I'm growing non-GMO corn, non-GMO beans and getting a premium for those. And I believe that's important when you're talking about no-till and cover crops, because that's a system where you manage the planting of the cover crop, what cover crop species you're going to have, when are you going to terminate? And that should be late, not early. A lot of people getting into the cover crop business rush out in March and kill their cover crop. Well, you're just 10, 20% on the way of utilizing all the things you get from cover crops. We're terminating ours right now, and this is May 15th. So we've had cover crops that have grown to 3.5 foot tall, not only pulling up nutrients, but building soil biology, but also in my mix, which is where we're going to corn, it is 13 pounds an acre, 60% of which is annual ryegrass, 20% is crimson clover, and 20% Valencia clover. And one of the reasons I added Valencia clover is I was concerned because when I'd walk out on hundreds of acres of beautiful crimson clover, I couldn't find a bee. There wasn't a bee anywhere. And I'm like, I'm doing all this. Why am I not helping the bees? And finally somebody said, dummy, bees don't go to red flowers. And I went, oh. So I added Valencia clover and we had bees everywhere. So it's when you're out planting into a prairie of cover crop, the wind's blowing it, it's beautiful, but there's swallows flying all around the tractor, catching the bugs that are flying up out of it. There's mourning doves, bobwhite quail, turkeys, all kinds of songbirds that are out in that prairie setting, which is your cover crop. Now, also in growing those legumes, I'm hoping to build nitrogen for this crop, but that nitrogen is not available in the beginning. And the nitrogen comes not from the ground, it comes from the biomass. So biomass equates to nutrients. So we let it get up and mature, and then we only count on the nitrogen credits that comes from the biomass of the clovers for late season nitrogen. And after all, that's when your corn needs it, very late in the growing season. When it goes into its reproductive stages and ear forming stages, it has a huge increase in its nitrogen needs. And that's when we believe this clover biomass kicks in. So I feed it nitrogen with the planter. You see no-till corn that's kind of yellow when it comes up. I want mine dark green. And so I don't want it longing for nitrogen. One of the things that we changed last year, and we're going to do 100% this year is the next step. So you've planted, you've got a good stand. We don't put fertilizer on in fall. We don't put fertilizer on in the spring. We are now on all of our ground putting fertilizer on side dress with a fertilizer applicator. So when the corn is up and growing or the beans is up and growing and they're not so busy, is that we have them spread all the fertilizer in those crops. So on really rugged ground, steep ground where you're going to knock down a lot of crops with a side dress rig, they go in with a spreader with narrow tires and spread all of the nitrogen, all of the nutrients. Later, when the corn's up and growing and getting pretty good size. So now we do that on 100% of our acres. We certainly had good results with that last year. And it takes some of the workload. I mean, we're just struggling to get all this planted in these weather conditions. But then, we got to turn around and spray everything post-emergent, and you got to side dress. We got to reduce that workload to be able to get it all done and be able to have a life. And so we're having the Cirrus Solutions, which is now Keystone Cooperative. We're having them and working with them, Betsy Bauer, doing variable rate fertilizer. Let's just dig into that a second. So when you're fertilizing corn, you can't change the phosphorus back and forth because it has nitrogen in it. So you're messing up as the phosphorus goes up and down according to different areas in the field. Then you're varying the nitrogen back and forth. Some areas wouldn't get any nitrogen out of your phosphorus. So we do phosphorus in the corn year at a standard non-variable rate, but we do the potash at a variable rate. And so if an area of the field doesn't need any potash or its area of the field needs a lot of potash, we variable rate in the tank, in the fertilizer rig, the potash. And so when we go to beans, we do just the opposite. It's our opportunity to variable rate the phosphorus and keep the potash standard, because you can't just variable rate three different nutrients. You're talking nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. So we're using other, other forms of nitrogen and sulfur in that mix. But basically, that's what I'm doing after the crops come up. So that, again, is a little different than what we did. A lot of farmers are still putting fertilizer in the fall. Can you imagine putting fertilizer on in the fall and these kind of rainfalls and these kind of conditions that we have, and saying that's what we're going to be utilizing with our crop in May and June of the next year? I want to put it on in May and June and get it to it efficiently and keep it out of the river system. When we have massive erosion like we've had now, the phosphorus particles are bonded to the soil particles and they're going into the creek, and the creek is muddy. And then the nitrogen, this heavy load of nitrogen that's just been put on, it's going to go into the water with it. And we'll have dead zones in the Gulf. We'll have blue-green algae in the drinking water of Indianapolis with signs that say, do not let your pets into the water all around the drinking water lakes of Indianapolis. We got to have a solution for that. Sequestering the nutrients into the soil, putting them on in a timely manner is how we help take care of agriculture's part of nutrient loading in our water systems and water. So those are some of the things that I do throughout the season. One of the things that is different than most farmers is I demand that my seed is naked. In other words, no seed treatments on it. And some of the research has been done by Purdue and by entomologists, is presented at the National No-Till Conference. Everybody should go. Is that probably less than 20%, sometimes 10% of the neonicotinoids end up in any part of the root, shoot, seed. It doesn't even get into the corn plant. So that means 80 to 90% of this poison that hurts the soil biology and hurts insects is getting away into the environment. I don't need to spend money on something I don't get any use out of. And some of the research is showing fields that use naked seed, that when they test that corn, it's got almost as much neonicotinoid in it as the treated field. So it's out there in the environment getting into my corn. I don't want it. I don't want it in my fields. I don't want it on my seed. So I demand, and if they can't do it, like DeKalb, refuse to do it. That's their business, is selling seed treatments. If they can't do it, and Bex has failed recently when we tried to do it with them, if you can't provide me naked seed that is not treated with neonicotinoids, I can't do business with it. We don't use neonicotinoids on our wheat. We don't use it on our bean seed, and we don't use it on our corn. In beans, you're putting on 3 times as much seed, so you're putting on 3 times as much neonicotinoids per acre. So it's very important to me that I help these bugs. Our bugs are one of the essential parts of life. They're not a pest. The ones that we call a pest are eaten alive. They don't have a chance when you have a massive amount of beneficial plants out there. The only exception is if I got stink bugs, I'll kill them. Stink bugs are not native. They're a invasive bug. If they're in my beans, I got to kill them. I've experienced some severe damage from stink bugs in the pods of beans. So that's the exception. I'm not a purist where I just want to do some of these things. But I certainly don't do it just because a salesman or an ad on the radio says you got to use our new seed treatment. It controls all pests. That's not good. I want insects to abound in my soils. Also, I'm growing non-GMO, and the plant over here, GPC Grain Processing Corporation, just 4 miles from my grain elevator, it has to be 99.1% pure non-GMO. So that's hard for seed companies to reach that level of purity. So again, I demand naked seed, and I demand that it has to be close to zero of any GMO traits in the seed that I'm planting. So that's a high hurdle to clear, but Pioneer can do it. A lot of times our Pioneer seed comes back zero, and we have every box or every variety, every lot tested at the corn plant. We will not plant corn without it being tested out of our box at the corn plant. So what does that corn go to? Well, believe it or not, it's non-GMO corn to make vodka and whiskey. And my Dr. Tom just down the road goes, really? They want non-GMO to poison their liver? And I'm like, hey, that's not my responsibility. And I think I've talked about this before, but that's why I'm growing non-GMO, is those great premiums I get. Now, this year, we're growing all clear Highland bean, and we're getting a great premium out of that. And those are all non-GMO. And so, what I started to say a while ago is when you have a management system where you're managing your land for no-till and cover crop, you often have the management skills to grow specialty crops. The two kind of go together with the mindset and the personalities and innovativeness that comes with no-till and cover crops. So, I think it fits well, and it certainly does on our operation to make a bigger profit by growing crops that need to be managed with separated seed, contamination, high quality grain that you sell. All those things are important. And I think they go along with no-till and cover crops. Now, this horse planter, it's a big animal that's heavy and powerful. And Michaela, if you can see these cylinders on the side over here do what John Deere planters can't do. These huge cylinders here push down on the wings of the planter. So you don't have this problem of the wings floating up in the no-till cover crop. John Deere has a problem of the planters are too light out on the wings, So you might see people adding weights out there, or putting and using or having markers out there where you can see the horse doesn't even offer a marker. It's all guidance system. So, and it's so big and powerful and ability to push that pressure out on the wings with hydraulic down pressure. So it can really push it down into the ground to make sure your seed's getting into there. Another innovative thing, let's just look right here, is that each row unit is driven by electric motor. That's very innovative. So each one of them is counting what actually it's putting out. It's not doing a calculation. It's counting each row. And as you turn on a big curve or something, the motors all compensate by the distance traveled. So they all change. Each row changes its rate as you go around the curve. Really innovative stuff on this planter. You can see John Deere has these small arms, the parallel arms. Look at the size of those arms. You're not going to bend this unit or you're going to knock down the fence post or the telephone pole. and so this powerfulness is, I think, an important factor on your equipment and what you can do with it. Small planters are okay, but in my case, where we're trying to cover a lot of acres in a hurry, having a planter, our number one investment, having a planter that can do the job. It has a huge seed tank on it, and it also carries 1,000 gallons of nitrogen up there in that tank, and then we put 110 on each side of the planter to get additional distance when we're putting on nitrogen. So we can go 40 plus acres before you have to fill up. But that's a big job when you're filling up several times a day and hauling all that nitrogen to the field. But again, it's like side dressing. You're getting a lot of your nitrogen on a lot of acres using your planter, which putting on 24 rows of nitrogen is a pretty good way to do it, and you're putting it right on the row. This year, we're going to use some new side dressing equipment. It's tubes that hang down each side and have a rubber tube that runs alongside the row, and try to do more side dressing with our sprayer so that we can go through taller corn and not be using a front assist tractor and a pull behind side dress rig, because we're knocking down a lot of corn and we're not covering enough acres fast enough. So it's a big job taking care of all this, and we just try to get more done more efficient. Michaela, have we got any questions yet?
We do. This one's 2 questions. Were the cover crops inoculated with microbials? Same question for corn or beans planted into no-till.
So we did use some biologicals for the first time this year, and we also used NanoPro, which helps put the herbicide into small particles to hopefully more efficiently kill down the cover crop. And we're putting a biological that comes off the back through our tubular right on the row. But that's something when we're putting nitrogen stabilizer, and you got to be careful which ones you use because you don't want to hurt your soil biology. But we're adding a nitrogen stabilizer, and then we're putting a biological off the back with the tubular on top of the rows at planting. So we may do some things post-emergent, but they recommended probably the most efficient use of our biological would be off the back next to the row. So we're putting things on top of the ground, but right alongside the seed on both sides.
So what is the biological supposed to be doing for you?
That's a good question. Well, they're supposed to be stimulating the biological activity in the soil. Some would say, my gosh, Ray, you got so much soil biology out there doing that why would you add anything? But there's certainly a big movement in that direction. So I thought it wouldn't hurt on a few hundred acres to put some biological on there and see how it works. So again, it comes from recommendations from friends and so forth that say, I think this is helping my ground. It's helping my crops. And I'm like, I may be making a mistake, but that's what no-till farmers do, is make mistakes or find solutions that help them up their yield. So I did put some on for the first year ever this year in a mix in the tank. So in the tank is a nitrogen stabilizer, a biological thiazole for sulfur, and 32% nitrogen. So that's what's going on the back of the row. And again, that has to be mixed at the farm and delivered to me. But it's not that big a deal to add those in your, I don't know if you call it starter, the nitrogen we're putting off the back of the planter.
And what's the rate of the things you have in the tank?
Okay, so per acre, it's 23 gallons of 32% nitrogen. So we're maybe getting 77 pounds of nitrogen on the field with the planter. It's 3 gallons of thiazole. And then the biologicals are down in the 4 ounces per acre area, or it could be, I think one of them is maybe a quart per acre. And so I think the one we're using is a quart per acre. And then the stabilizer is going on at like 1.8 gallons per 1,000 gallons. And so if we have excessive rainfall, but mainly since we're setting it on top of the ground during the warm growing season, we don't want it volatilizing up into the air. So first time we get a rain, you're in good shape. But if it sits on top of the ground for a week or 10 days, we want it stabilized and not getting away from us.
Okay. There's a follow-up question about the biological. Pete is asking if it's live biology or if it's supposed to be a food source for the biology.
It's live biology. So when we put it in the tank or get it out of the bottle, you need to get it on. So you wouldn't want to pre-mix that the day before. You want to get it on the ground as fast as possible. And look, I'm not a biological expert. I'm just telling you that I am using it, that we are mixing it and trying to use it up before dark so that we don't carry any over in that mix to the next day, which to me sounds like you could lose the biology out of it once the jug's open and once you put it in that starter mix. So that's what I know about it, and what that's going to do to the biology in my soil, let's see. And we can walk through stands of corn here real soon and look. But unless you do, this is my opinion, unless you do trials, it's hard to determine if you're gaining or not gaining. So you have to go, and this is kind of the philosophy I always use. I can't do all these trials. People like Paul Jessa and different people just do trials. Rodney Rulon and a lot of people like that, they just do trials and trials and trials. So I like to take the advice of people that are very knowledgeable, are independent, and that can give you what they have seen in their trial. So we have some really rough fields. There's not uniform soil types. There could be 6 soil types in a field. It's very hard for me to even do seed corn or seed plot trials, variety trials. So in everything, which seed I use, how I put the nitrogen on the back, I like to take the advice of people that are a lot smarter than I am, that have looked at it and worked at it and put a lot of thought into it. I go to the National No-Till Conference and I hear a speaker and I'm like, my God, this guy spent his whole life on soil compaction and equipment. I'm like, he's got so much knowledge. It's, when I go to the National No-Till Conference, I sit there for about 15 minutes. I go, well, I just paid for that, because you learn so much from such great people that you get to pay back in the first speaker or the first meeting or the breakout session. It's just, you gain this incredibly valuable information that would take you a lifetime to study. That's what they've been doing in their life. Paul Jess is a good example of that, of having a planner that's got every company's row unit on there and plant them all at the same time and publishing the results over a decade. Mike Plummer did the same thing with annual ryegrass and planting corn and not adding inner fertilizer over 10 years. I don't have 10 years left. So I love to learn from people at the National No-Till Conference, any other soil health meeting, anything I go to like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is such a great idea. I would have never thought of that, but somebody has, and it was communicated through these great meetings that are going on across the country. So if you want to know how to be a better cover crop no-till farmer, go to as many of them as you can. Definitely go to the National No-Till Conference. I've been to many of them. I was at the first one. I was the first speaker at the first one. So I've been to many of them, and I got to credit a lot of what I've learned from going to those breakout sessions, hearing those speakers, and then the speakers I don't like, I raise my voice and ask questions that make them very uncomfortable, but that's my personality. So when the speaker this year, the first speaker was talking about yield advantage from tillage from his research at the university, and it was driving me crazy. So he asked for questions, and I said, well, how long are you going to maintain yields better than no-till when your soil's gone? Well, he didn't like that question. So they asked me to leave a lot, but you don't have time.
We have a couple more questions about the planter, and then there's a handful about cover crops. So we'll start with the planter ones. First one, what is this wheel?
All right, so you can take this out and turn that wheel down, and it's a wheel that you can run right behind your true V opener to press and hold the seed down. We normally don't use it. We've used them and not used them. We don't think they're necessary. And so instead of running that down in the row, we just use these superior row closing wheels to close that. So these can be flipped around and put upside down and have them running directly behind the seed, like you might see in a modern John Deere drill. So it's not a closing wheel, but it's like a press wheel.
Looks like we're having some technical difficulties. Just hang in there, folks. Hopefully they'll rejoin us in just a sec here. And looks like they're back.
Sorry, everyone. I had a phone call that interrupted the broadcast, and then it dropped out. So we're back now. So we were talking about this wheel.
Now, Michaela, we didn't lose the signal. At 70 years old, you got to take a leak every once in a while. I went around behind the tire and you cut it off until I got back. That is true about being 70 years old. So what's the question now?
So this is someone had asked about the brand and distributor of the planter. So it's a Horsch. Who's the distributor?
I got mine from Drago, Indiana, out of it's up towards West Lafayette, just a little east of West Lafayette. So they've been a great partner. And people go, well, what happens when you need stuff? What you need, most of them, and what we use most of all, is somebody answering the phone, because it will not plant. It's all computerized. So the most important part of who you buy from these days is who will pick up the phone on Friday evening, Sunday morning, and tell you this is the solution. This is why the computer's messed up. Go through these steps, get it back on. The other important part is you got to have a son or daughter that is young and go, Dad, I've showed you this 3 times. This is what you got to punch on the screen to make it work. So, you know, we don't seldom need a part. They have an airplane. They'll fly it to you. But on a planter, you don't have things that break down, So when you go through the planter and you change wheels out, check bearings, you really don't have stuff that breaks on this planter anyway. What you have is computer glitches or something where it locks up or something, and you need help because this planter will not plan unless the computer's up in front of the cab, and there's 3 screens in the cab, so we try to be documenting everything and being able to look at it on the go and being able to have it in field view. And so we've got 3 screens running in the planter.
Okay. And then the other question about the planter was if you ever put P and K down with the tubular.
I have. And when we used to go into the river bottoms, we would put 50% nitrogen and 50% phosphorus, P2O5, because in the river bottoms we weren't adding any phosphorus because it's so rich in phosphorus from collecting other farmers' topsoil, which we collected this year. 30 tons per acre is what we collect on most floods. But after a while, we decided that we didn't really need it, and it's an expensive way to put on phosphorus. So we are not putting it on, because putting it on with those things that go in here, you have to mix and so forth. And about 100% of our nitrogen is pre-mixed with the phosphorus. So when it's delivered in bulk, it's pre-mixed. So the less mixing you have to do with an employee that is 30 miles away, he just has to put this in and this in, and it's the nitrogen and phosphorus are pre-mixed. So we used to have a PTO5 tank there where we would put 50% in of phosphorus, 50% of nitrogen, but we quit doing that because of the higher cost of doing it that way.
Okay. So then the cover crop questions, could you go into a little more detail about your on the combine seeder and what you're putting in the mix?
So when we're going to corn, in other words, we're harvesting beans, we have 2 Gandy seeders, one on each side of a draper, John Deere draper. The John Deere draper runs off of, I'm going to call her feelers, under the head. So it's feeling the ground, moving the head up and down. So having weight in different parts of the head has no impact on its performance. So being able to do that, we have a seeder on the right and the left. They have electric motors, so they put on the constant rate as you move across the field. When we're going to corn, it's 13 pounds per acre, 60% of which is annual ryegrass, 20% of which is Valencia clover, 20% is crimson clover. So it's a 40% clover mix with the annual ryegrass. I used to do cereal rye, and it was great, but cereal rye does not like wet feet. It can't tolerate flooding in all of our river bottoms. All of our river bottoms flooded, and we went back down here, and the annual ryegrass is going, yahoo, we love that, Cereal rye would have been dead and laying on the ground. So annual ryegrass is also very small seeded. The size of the seed is small compared to oats or cereal rye. And that allows you to go further per cubic foot of the capacity of the seeders. So in other words, if you can go 40 acres of annual ryegrass and you could only go 6 or 7 putting on 60 pounds of cereal rye is not well adapted to using seeders off the head. We pull a seed tender with maybe one mix in the back and one mix in the front, depending on if we're going to switch from corn to beans and so forth. And we just fill up like we do right now when we're drilling beans. They're on the front. They have the hoppers or the elevator swung out, and I slide up under there, and the tube's hanging down. They flip the lid open, push the button. In less than 2 minutes, it's full. They pull forward and fill the other one up in less than 2 minutes. So I went to the bathroom, I back up on the combine, and I'm ready to go for another 40 acres. When we're using it on the corn head, we have a Valmar, which is a really big seeder. It's 40 cubic foot, not 10 like the Gandys are. And it is hydraulic. Now let's go back. On your platform, you have to rob oil, and on a draper, you have an extra oil supply that is available down through the cross auger because they added that for like combining flax or something. So there is an oil plumbing system down on the head. What you do is you circulate the oil all the way around both seeders so that you flow the air that are distributed by air in tubes. So on a header, the draper, you're blowing it off the back as you go, and then the chopper is spreading uniformly the residue and covering up the seed. So it's instant emergence. It always comes up, and it's always a great stand. Now, in the corn head, you turn around and you run your air tubes out in front of your snapping rollers under the snoots, and you have a pan that hits and spreads it. And in that case, you're having the corn residue. And Marion Palmer at the National No-Till Conference said all your residue should go down through your corn head and not through the combine. So when I was laying awake at night, trying to understand how I could put on cover crops in one pass, that bell rang in my head, what Marion Palmer had said at the National No-Till Conference. And I go, well, then I need to blow the seed out in front of the residue that's going through our corn head. And so that's what I did. The Valmar is a 40 cubic foot, but we only fill it halfway because 40 cubic feet of seed is a lot of weight out on the side of a 12-row corn head. So we only fill it to 20, and that gets you a long way. In that mix, we're using annual ryegrass at 12 pounds an acre and 1 pound of turnips to get a little diversity in there, to feed wildlife, because a lot of wildlife likes turnips and turnip greens. And so we like having turnips out there with us. But any small seeded cover crops will work seeding with the combine, but large seed, like before I started seeding off the head, we drilled with peas and cereal rye. So that was a lot of pounds going on, 60-pound mix of Austrian winter peas and cereal rye. When we were doing that, I was losing my son because it was so important to have cover crops that he drilled all day. He lost the dryer operator and my right-hand man. Now he's the boss. And so, hell of a price to pay. And I said it was worth it. But what I really did like is the gauge wheels, just exactly like these on the drill. On a John Deere, they're soft. These are not soft. On a John Deere, they're soft. And when you're going across freshly cut bean stubble or corn stalks, it just chopped and did massive damage. It also damaged the tires on your tractor and drill. So we could put new tires on there, and then after a few hundred acres, they were all chopped up from this fresh stubble, which is strong and vibrant. So I wanted to figure out how I did it one pass, so there wasn't a second pass with the drill that freed up my son and didn't blow diesel fuel into the air and was more efficient. And so we experimented and found that doing it with the combine is fabulous. I don't know why everybody in this far south isn't doing it, but and it works great. I love putting it on that way. So again, 2 mixes, 60% annual ryegrass, 40% clovers, where we're going to corn, cutting beans, and then 12 pounds of annual ryegrass and a pound of turnips, where we're going to corn, or going to beans, where we're picking.
Okay. And then your cash crop rotation, corn and soybeans.
Yes, but we broke that 20-year tradition last year and grew wheat. There's something tempting about $10 wheat. And we just happened to have soybeans on all our higher, lighter soils. So I drilled 700 acres of wheat. And down here, where it's this high humidity and this wet, you got to spray it. We sprayed it 5 times. You have to kill the annual ryegrass, which is a separate pass, because you got to get rid of it. You can't have that out. And we had 0. So we had to burn it down and then spray it to kill the annual ryegrass. Then we had to foliar feed it and spray fungicide or scab and so forth. And I hate to brag, but I'm going to. Yogi Berra said it's not bragging if it's fact. But 20 years ago when I grew wheat, 60 bushel wheat was great wheat. I had a field that made 162 bushel wheat. More of them made 140 and 130. I just couldn't believe it. And high price wheat and those kind of yields, I'm never going to do it again, because it's going to be a disappointment after last year. But we had great success with our wheat. And again, maybe I got lucky, but I think a lot of it is taking care of your soils, building up your soil biology, and then to bring a diverse crop into the mix, it just boomed. So I was really proud of our wheat crop last year. Probably will never do it again or have that kind of luck. The wheat worked out really well.
All right, we got about 5 minutes left, so now's
5 minutes.
Now
I didn't think we could ever make it.
Yeah. I knew we would. So if you have any questions, now's the time. The one we have right now is, do you terminate cover crops before or after planting? And do you roll any of it down?
I don't roll any of it because it's annual ryegrass. So that won't work with annual ryegrass. It works with cereal rye. What was the first part of the question?
When do you terminate?
Okay, great question. A lot of people, I feel, are making a mistake. They're growing cover crops everywhere in my area, but the first chance they get in March, they go out and kill it. Well, what the heck? You got March, April, May to grow this huge cover crop biomass. Because we're putting on tubular in the back, that nitrogen flowing out of there burns the leaves. So we need to get the Roundup on 48 hours to 3 days ahead of planting, so that the Roundup can go down into the cereal rye, our annual ryegrass, and get it before we burn the leaves. Now, I love planting green, but when you're putting nitrogen over the top, you got to give that Roundup 2 or 3, 4 days to get into the plant, not have green strips alongside the row. That's not a good feeling when you look out there and it's all dead except right alongside the row where you burned it with the nitrogen. So planting green is good, but not with a tubular system off of the back. So we are planting green. It's still green when I'm planting, but it's in the process of dying. So it's a little yellowish when I'm planting, and then by the time the corn comes out of the ground, I don't want any green anywhere. Your corn should never see green. There's a term for that, but corn is damaged if it sees green when it comes out of the ground. In our beans, again, I'm different. So it's all non-GMO. So there is no Roundup rescue. So if you got grass, if you got annual ryegrass you didn't kill in your corn, you're in trouble. In non-GMO beans, if you got stuff you didn't kill and it's non-GMO, you're in trouble. So with non-GMO, we're real careful about getting a good kill and not just plan into it, which I used to do with GMO. Is just plan into it whether we had it sprayed or not sprayed. And the beans, besides prairie bowls, the beans just said, oh, we don't care whether you killed it or not. We just keep growing them. So I actually left some as an experiment in a field where we left it until we post-emergent sprayed the field. And they were good beans, not corn. So I think you got a lot of more flexibility with beans, but definitely if you're going non-GMO, you've got to be careful.
Okay. And then our last question here is, have you ever had trouble with slugs?
No. No. No.
Why
What
do
is
you
a
think
slug?
that is?
Well, when you have a lot of beneficial insects, this is not my opinion, this is research done, is they got a powerful appetite for slugs, for all kinds of stuff. So there's been places where farmers have went from treated beans to non-treated beans, and that's where the slugs stop. So I'm a big believer in, and I'll probably get ate up with slugs this year, but I never even look for them, pay attention to them, never see any damage. So it happens in my area, but it doesn't happen in my beans. So not using neonicotinoids, I believe, is why I don't have slug problem.
Okay. Brian Overstreet says thank you.
And I'm so thankful that I get an opportunity to help people that want to do the right thing. No-till, cover crop, soil health is the future of saving this planet.
And that is a perfect note to end this on, I think. If you have any more questions for Ray, feel free to submit those through our Ask the Operator form on our website, and then I'll send those on to Ray and get you an answer. Thank you, everybody who joined us live and who asked questions this morning. We appreciate you taking time out of your days, especially during planting season, to be here with us. So if you would like to replay this webinar or share the recording with someone, we will be emailing out a link within the next 48 hours. So look for your email, look for that link in your email that you use to register for this webinar. It'll also be available at no-tillfarmer.com. And we will see you next time. Hope everyone has a great day.
Be careful out there.